Welcome to the Real Estate Deep Dive with Paul D. Garrison from JP and Associate Realtors. Today we're going to look at the question that pretty much everyone asks me, whether they're looking to buy homes in the near future or they're looking to sell a home. They all want to know, is the housing market going to crash? Well, let me caveat this as no one has a crystal ball for sure, but what we can do is we can take a look at some of the major causes of market crashes and where we are today. So what we have here is the 5 main causes of an industry crash. We're going to take a detailed look at each one of these items and kind of compare it to where we are today. So let's take a look at the first one. An item or service becomes obsolete. Kind of think of a great example of Blockbuster and Netflix. So how does that relate to housing? Well, according to Unison's 2021 State of the American Homeowner study, 64% of American homeowners say living through the pandemic made their home more important to them than ever. And 83% of the homeowners say that their home has kept them safe during the COVID-19 pandemic, while 91% of homeowners say that they feel secure, stable, and successful owning a home. So why is this important? Well, back if you look at 2009, 2010 timeframe, there was actually a larger movement of people thinking it was better to rent than to purchase, and that was due in large part to the last crash. Well, after living through the pandemic, I would say things have changed, and the study kind of shows that things have actually changed to the other direction. So we have to ask ourselves, is homeownership becoming obsolete? Especially after the pandemic and looking at the results of the study, I have to say that it's not. It's becoming more and more important to everyone. So let's take a look at the second reason. Demand for an item or service drops dramatically. Let's think of kind of like restaurants in the summer of 2020. If your business is based off of people gathering and eating together, and all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, you can't do that, then yes, you're going to see some severe drop in demand for your business. That certainly put restaurants in a tough position. Some made it through, some didn't, unfortunately. And we've seen a lot of headlines recently about the changes or the real estate market actually slowing down and that sort of thing. But so much so that we did a deep dive last week about that. But to kind of put this into perspective, here's a graph that actually shows the number of showings that were booked in September over the last 5 years. This is a great way to look at buyer demand. You can see we have actually cooled a little bit or slowed down. So compared to 2020, 2021 was at 175 versus 184. But you can see that where we are for 2021 is actually well above what I would call the last 3 normal years. Obviously, 2020 was affected by the pandemic, but 2019, 18, and 17 were all still quite a ways lower as far as buyer demand than what we were seeing in 2021. So to really put it in perspective, though, this quote from Bill McBride does a great job. So sales non-seasonally adjusted in September were 548,000, or 2.7% below the sales of September 2020, which was 563,000. So here's the key part. Excluding last September, because it was distorted because of the pandemic, everything was kind of pushed to the tail end of the year rather than the first part of the year. Sales non-seasonally adjusted for 2021 were the strongest since 2005. So going all the way back to 2005, we've had the strongest sales in 2021. So that's great. We've been really strong up till today, but will we continue to see that going forward? Well, here's a graph of 4 of the major experts in the field and their predictions or forecasts for 2021 and 2022. To put it in perspective, we sold 6.5 million homes in 2020. All 4 are forecasting well above that to finish out for 2021 and for 2022 as well. So again, very strong number of sales, but the question also is, do we think that the robustness, are we going to continue to see these jumps in appreciation of value? Well, no. I think a lot of the experts are forecasting that we're going to see that start to decelerate. Not depreciate, but decelerate. Let's take a look at the third one. The demand for items or services was artificially generated. Think about home loans of 2006 to 2008. So looking back at this time period for home loans, we can actually see that the demand for these home sales or home loans was actually artificially created because many people got loans that they weren't capable of paying. So if you think about all the different products that were in the market from a loan perspective, no income verification, no cash down, it was pretty much almost, just tell us what you want and we'll give you the loan. So let's take a look at lending standards over time. This is a report from the Urban Institute. It looks at the default risk of the mortgage market from 1999 to 2020. It's looking at both product risk and borrower risk. So you can see the yellow line there represents the reasonable lending standard. And with that, you're going to have a little bit of product risk, you're going to have a little bit of borrower risk. Well, since the last crash, you can actually see that the product risk has been virtually eliminated. And we've actually tightened up quite a bit on the borrower risk, and that's what you need to qualify to be able to get a loan. We can actually even see this represented in the Mortgage Brokers Association's Credit Availability Index. So the way you read this chart is the lower the number is, the harder it is to get a loan. So you can see going back in time all the way back into the 2004 through 2006 time period, building up to the last crash, that it was very easy to get a loan with a score of 868. Compare that with today, a score of 125. It's much harder today to get a loan than it was prior to the last crash, for good reason. We've actually, again, tightened up those standards and made it more difficult to get a loan, thus reducing that risk, that borrower risk that we looked at in the last chart. So you can see that they started to loosen this up a little bit, make it a little bit easier starting around 2013. But as we went into the pandemic, these standards were tightened up again to make it a little bit harder to reduce that borrower risk. So I think it's safe to say in the current market that the demand for the home sales has not been artificially generated. So let's look at the next item. Supply of an item or service increases dramatically. Think of the housing crash from 15 years ago. So what caused that? Well, we saw a lot of these builders just building like crazy, so supply dramatically increased. This, of course, caused a drop in value. So we saw, in some cases, up to a 20% drop in home values. So where do we stand today? Well, we're actually in a pretty severe deficit as far as supply or inventory goes for homes for sale. That's what's been one of the major forces fueling the appreciation we've seen over the past year. So, of course, that brings up the question of, but what about all those foreclosures after the forbearance period ends? So if we look at the past 5 years, the number of foreclosures, it averages out to about 290,000 for 2017 through 2019. Again, the closest three normal years that we have to compare against. So of course, 2020, because of the forbearance programs, we had a significant number less. We had about 129,000 foreclosures in 2020. And if we look at what we've had so far for the first half of 2021, we've only had 19,560 foreclosures. So there is no doubt that we're going to see foreclosures coming onto the market as the forbearance moratorium is lifted. But we're still likely to be short compared to what a normal average year would be. Actually, so much so that we could have 431,960 additional foreclosures, and that would only make up for the difference we've seen over the last 2 years. So right now there's 1.24 million homeowners that are in forbearance. That number's come down significantly since the beginning of the program, where we had 4.76 million homeowners in forbearance. And we should continue to see that number significantly drop as more and more people come off of forbearance. So if we look at the study from Black Knight, about 7% of those 1.24 million homes have less than 10% equity in their home. Equity has been kind of one of the saving graces here, because if you have at least 10% equity, you should be able to easily sell your home on the market, be able to pay commissions, and probably even put a little bit of cash in your pocket and be able to walk away without damaging your credit. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but let's take a worst case scenario and look at, say, that all 7% end up filing for foreclosures. So that would be just almost not quite 87,000 foreclosures. If we add that to the 19,000 that we already have, that puts us roughly at about 106,000 foreclosures for the year. That would be significantly lower than what we've seen over the 2017, 18, and 19. So given that and the building constraints we've seen as far as supply chain and all those issues we've all noticed, I don't see a huge surplus of homes coming into the market in the near future. First, I want to thank you for hanging in with me. We're on the last of the 5 items. Let's talk about demand for an item or service that's impacted by outside market dynamics. Kind of think of what Hummers did or large SUVs did whenever oil prices skyrocketed. So what's the outside market dynamic that would have such an impact on houses, similar to what oil prices had on those SUVs or large trucks? That's pretty simple. It's interest rates. So historically, what have interest rates done over the last 4 years? Well, here's a quick chart to kind of help highlight that. And you can see over the different years that we've bounced back and forth between anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5, almost 5% interest. So then along came 2020 and the pandemic happens. And while the federal government can't control interest rates, they can influence interest rates. So they took action. And of course, we see interest rates drop from just above 3.5% to just above the 2.5% range. So then 2021 comes, and what kind of environment are we in now? Well, we're in what would be considered a rising interest rate environment. You can kind of see that we've flirted around and gone up over 3, bounced below, and then back up above. So where are the experts saying we're headed? Well, most of them are forecasting between 3.5 and 4%. So we don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but it appears to be headed back towards the range we were previously, within that 3.5 to 4.5, 5% range. And this is actually the same range that we've actually seen interest rates for probably going back about 10 years. So is this something that's going to squelch or cause the market to crash? That's unlikely. However, it is going to make a home more expensive to purchase. So that's going to affect both buyer demand somewhat and also supply, because a lot of people have refinanced their homes at very low interest rates. So they're going to be less likely to do that upgrade move. So I think it's going to affect both sides of the supply and demand curves because of that. Many of the metrics and numbers in this presentation are based off of the national real estate market. However, local areas can vary. Please give me a call and we can discuss your situation. Have questions about your specific needs or location? Please contact me at 214-683-8188 or paul@pauldgarrison.com. Want more information about the housing market and related issues? Be sure and check out my blog at www.pauldgarrison.com. Thank you for your time. Please take a moment to visit our website at www.pauldgarrison.com.